Well, I'm so glad to take this off. That means I get to start tasting. So we're in Spain today, and I love Spain. I love the wines of Spain. I love the food of Spain. I love Spain. And Spain has wonderful, rich, long-lived wines and wonderful, wonderful value wines. It's a wonderful, life-loving food and wine culture, and that's probably the reason I love it so much. So today we're really going to be talking about wines from northern Spain, and we can look at that Google map I had up, and we'll go back to that now, and then you'll see that Spain, and we don't really think of it this way, but Spain is a very, very mountainous country. And oddly enough, it has the most acres planted to grapevines, more than any other country. Spain is the most planted, and yet only recently has it risen up to second place for wine production. France and Italy always fight traditionally for who's going to make the most wine. France, Italy. Poor Spain has always been third, but now it's kind of muscled. I think lately it muscled France out of the way. So now it's Italy 1, Spain 2, France 3. They must really be sticking in their craw. If we look at this next slide, we have the wine regions of Spain, and here's really where we can see what we're doing today, because really we're going to be up there in the north. We're going to be tasting the wines of Rioja. That's right there, that orange section in the north of that map, and then we're going to move a little bit to the west of there, to the region of Toro. And then we'll go down to across in the northeast in Catalonia to the Priorat. And the Priorat is a great, great wine region that I've visited a couple of times now. And I'll admit I had a chip on my shoulder about Priorat. I'll get to that later. If we go to this next slide is where I want to spend a little bit of time with you, because I say that Spain has a little more class than the rest of the winemaking world. And it's really Spain that developed the Paul Masson school of winemaking thought, which is will serve no wine before its time. And Spain really lives that. They don't release wines. The tradition in Spain is to wait, have patience, and then we'll release the wine when it's ready to drink. And so that's what this little map here, where you see the words Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva. And when you see these labels on a bottle of wine, it's telling you that they are making wine the traditional way of aging. There's actually one level that starts it all off that I didn't list on here. It's a wine categorized as joven, and joven means young. Of course, we don't need to read Hoven to know it's a young wine because, you know, this is 2020. It's going to be a wine that's from 2019. So we know it's young. When it's labeled Hoven, it's telling you drink it while it's young and while it's fresh, and that fruit in the wine is vibrant. So drink up, because next year we're going to have a new batch and we'll start it all over again. When we see wines labeled Crianza, we're saying that the quality of the fruit is better. And so the wine benefits from a little longer aging before release. And so, as you see here for white wines, a Crianza white wine doesn't get released until it's 18 months old, generally speaking, and a Crianza red wine will be 2 years old before it's released, and that wine will be ready to drink on release and will still be good for another 5 years or potentially more, depending on that year's harvest and the producer making it. When you see a wine labeled Reserva, which is what we're tasting tonight, Reserva is just that much better fruit at the beginning. And so that wine requires, 3 years of aging between oak and bottle before it gets released. And that wine too will be ready for consumption upon release. But, you want to lay that wine down for 10 to 20 years, that wine will still be drinking well throughout all of that. And again, it's always depending on that year's harvest and the producer making it. When we see wines labeled Gran Reserva, those wines may not necessarily be made every year because maybe Mother Nature didn't really provide that quality fruit every year. Gran Reserva wines, when we're talking about a red wine, must be held back for 5 years before release. And those wines, again, ready to drink on release, but should stand up to 20 plus years in your cellar, and you will be rewarded for that. But we can taste them along the way. Another thing about the wines of Spain, traditional wines of Spain, are aged in American oak, and so that gives a more of a perceived sweetness in the wine. American oak does, although a classic description of American oak is the smell of dill. And maybe you don't necessarily literally smell dill, but you get this green herbaceousness from American oak, as well as a toasted coconut aroma and flavor that adds to a perceived sweetness. And so the first wine we're going to taste tonight from Rioja is made with actually both French and American, but new American oak can be very assertive. And so you'll be able to recognize that. The other wines, I believe, are French oak aged. Now I'm forgetting. Forgive me. We sent out tech sheets to you, so I'm sorry I forgot, and so we just sent it off recently. So maybe it's in your inbox right now. If we go to our next slide, in Europe, well. Not in Spain, but in the rest of Europe, you're not allowed to irrigate your vines. And so vineyards have always been found in some proximity to rivers. That also gave you a way of being able to ship your wine out. Because we're tasting wines from the north of Spain, The two rivers that are most important for us are, number one, the Ebro, and you can see that the Ebro runs through Rioja, and Rioja is closer to the source of the Ebro River, and the Ebro runs from west to east and lets out into the Mediterranean. And we're going to start and sort of end in the Ebro because that's also where the Priorat is at the end of the Ebro's path. In the middle, we'll be tasting wine, and that's our middle wine, by the way. We have the wines from left to right, Rioja, then Toro, and then Priorat. And Toro sits along the Duero River. The Duero, it's called the Duero as it travels to the east, west to east, east to west, right? The two rivers. There we go. So travels west, and then when it enters into Portugal, the Duero becomes the Douro, and that gives us then the port region, and the port wines all ship out of Oporto, which is also what gives port its name. That's a subject for another day. So now, let us, and we can rest from the PowerPoint, and I can start to get into these wines. So let's put a nose first in these wines. I know you're halfway deep into all of them. I'm watching you. I see what you guys are doing there. It's okay. I can take it. I'm just starting. So this wine, number one, is our Rioja Reserva from Bodegas Ontañón. Ontañón is a family concern. 5 generations of family have been making these wines. They originally were grape growers selling their fruit to other wineries. In the 70s, they decided, hey, we've got great quality fruit. You know, what are we giving it away for? We can make our own wine, and we'll be the better for it. So traditional grape varieties, and in Rioja, we're talking about a wine made from Spain's most planted black grape, the Tempranillo grape. And Tempranillo is a grape that kind of sits, you know, I put Pinot Noir on one end, or maybe I'll do it this way. Pinot Noir on one end of the spectrum and Cabernet Sauvignon on the other end of the spectrum. And Tempranillo kind of sits in the middle because it's high acid like Pinot Noir, but it doesn't quite have the tannin structure as Cabernet Sauvignon. So it kind of fills that middle area. It's a grape variety that makes rosé wines, medium bodied, light to medium bodied, and full bodied red wines. So it's a versatile grape variety. Because of the high acid nature of the grape, I often find a lot of red fruits that I discern from it, from cranberries and strawberries and red cherries, and into kind of tart blackberry, and the florals on it can be anywhere from rose to violets. And when we get into traditional winemaking, which, you know, when in Spain, because they lie these wines down for these extended periods of time, their wine cellars are amazingly large because Gran Reserva wine, they can't release for 5 years. So can you imagine the backup of bottles of wine? They have to have huge cellars to maintain their wines. So with traditional winemaking, we can often get some characteristics that some people might consider wine flaws. And I've been talking a lot about I had a tasting with a group of sommelier this morning, and in Australia, and I think we've tasted Australian wines before when we were tasting on Wednesdays, and in Australia they like pristine, no oxidative aromas and flavors. They want fruit and earth and very clean and pristine. In Europe, they tend to be a little more loose. They don't get upset from a little bit of oxidation. When we get oxidative aromas and flavors, whether it be the aroma of nuts, because nuts is the classic oxidative aroma and flavor. We perceive whether it be hazelnuts, almonds, that is an oxidative, but in low doses, it's just an added complexity to the wine. Even little bits of vinegar, in wine, in low doses, adds a complexity to it. Hey, Brian made a delicious cocktail that he adds vinegar into the cocktail, and it just, it's a brilliant cocktail. It's delicious. And so I don't worry about oxidative or what some people may call a wine flaw. It's not a flaw until it takes over the wine and becomes the dominant feature. Everybody has their own sensitivity to it, and so only you can decide if it's a flaw or not. This is a mostly traditional Rioja, Tempranillo blended with, in this case, only 5% Graciano. Often we have Mazuelo, which is also known as Carignan, is a typical grape that gets blended in with the Tempranillo, which is always the dominant grape. And Garnacha, or Grenache, as the French call it. But Garnacha, Tempranillo, Carignan, these are Spanish grape varieties. And this is 95% Tempranillo, 5% Graciano, aged in both American and French oak. But you can get that kind of green dill aromatic on here. Some of that toasted coconut. The French oak is going to give us a little bit more of the baking spice, subtle cinnamon and nutmeg. And let me stop talking and let me taste. How do you say cheers in Spanish?
I'll confirm. Which wine are you drinking first?
So, wine number one is Rioja. Bodegas Ontañón is wine number one that I'm tasting.
Stephen Petty's asking, where can we buy these wines?
Well, if you have not gotten them, or if you like it and you want more, we got them here at the club, both at the beach in town. So fear not, we're not going to let you go dry of your Rioja wine. So feel how you're salivating. That's because Tempranillo is a high acid grape and it makes you salivate. It refreshes your palate. I know I'm a broken record on this, and I will continue to be, so just live with it. It is what makes it such a great food wine, because when you're going into that pork, or maybe a ribeye steak, it's the acid in the wine that helps cut the fat, helps you digest, and as I say, it refreshes the palate, so it makes you want to go back for more. I'm going to put that down a second, and now I want to put my nose in this middle glass because the middle glass is from Toro, Toro, as I say, is along the Duero River, the most famous region, and we may have to come back and do a tasting of just wines from the Ribera del Duero, from the banks of the Duero River. And for long, Spain's most famous wine, a wine called Vega Sicilia, was single-handedly the most expensive, the most sought-after red wine of Spain, and it's the winery that brought attention and fame to its region called the Ribera del Duero, the banks of the Duero River, and not only did it bring attention, but it lived this Spanish concept of not releasing a wine before its time, because the top wine of Vega Sicilia is their Único. And Vega Sicilia Único would age for 10 years before they would release it. And it was ready to drink on release, but I know many people that have been collecting Vega Sicilia Único, and they have 50-year-old bottles in their cellar that are still going strong. And I've been fortunate to be able to taste many of these wines. So just as we go west out of Ribera del Duero, a little beyond Rueda, we find ourselves in Toro. And now from the higher elevation of Rioja, the Duero River is going from higher to lower elevation. And in Toro, where it's a little lower, it's warmer. The Tempranillo grape gets riper. Here, the Tempranillo is called Tinto del Toro, the red grape of Toro, but it is Tempranillo. It may be a subtle mutation of Tempranillo that maybe gives subtly different qualities, but it still shares DNA with the Tinto Fino or the Ul de Llebre. I love that's the Catalan for Tempranillo. So if we put a nose in this, we see a very different characteristic here. Red and black fruits, and here we've got red and black cherry. We've got raspberry, red and black raspberry. And ripe, fresh, we want to it's like crunchy fruit. And maybe here it is a little bit more violets. I get some baking spices from oak. And this is a little bit more modern in its production, but this is a wine by Telmo Rodriguez, who has been a champion of wines throughout Spain, and he has worked hard to search out old vineyards and people who for long have been buying and selling their fruits. And here for this Toro property, he has collected the local growers that have been selling their fruit, but now he's brought them together. Don't sell your fruit. Let's together make a wine that represents our region here of Toro. And so it's really a wonderful thing that he's done in getting together vineyards that have been producing fruit for a long time, and families, and really helping reward them for the work that they've done and the preservation that maybe they didn't realize they were preserving. They were growing grapes all along, but now they get to have the pride of being able to share with their friends and neighbors and with us this wine that is the end result of their labors. Let me, you know what I mean. The acid is still there. I think the Rioja is a little brighter acid, but we're still medium plus acid here, cleansing the palate. But, you know, as we get into warmer region where the grapes get riper and as sugars rise in the grapes, the acids will start to come down. But this is still very fresh. And quite honestly, I think it's delicious wine. A little cleaner, doesn't have the extra character of maybe a little bit of leather going on in the Rioja, maybe a little bit of volatile aromas that kind of say, oh, what's going on here? This is fresher, cleaner, but ripe, delicious, and I think a very affordable wine. This was the best value of the three of these wines. And to have a Rioja Reserva, you know, for, you know, and now honestly I don't remember, but somewhere in the 20s, this Rioja Reserva is still a great deal for a wine that's been aged and held back. So the beauty of the Spanish system also, if they want to release wines sooner, they just don't use the verbiage of Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva, and then they're allowed to go by their own rules. They're not, you know, it's truth in advertising. If you say it's a Reserva, then you have to abide by the rules of what Reserva means. In Rioja, they actually age their Reservas longer and the Gran Reservas longer in oak before in the bottle. But this is like truly, and there's character though. There's some, I get some dried herbs going on. Even a little kind of stony, earthy, and even a little a tar flavor. I'm not even sure where that comes from. I suppose that could be coming out of toasted oak. But delicious wine, lots of character. I don't want to feel like I'm racing. What do I have pictures? I like to show pictures. I'm tired of looking at my face all the time. So we had after the rivers of Spain, we have a beautiful shot of Rioja, where you can see the Sierra Cantabria mountains in the background, and the village. I don't doubt that's a village of Haro, or our Rioja comes from Logroño, which is a wonderful, wonderful city when you go, because it's kind of a must if you find yourself loving these wines like I do. Wonderful tapas bars in Logroño. And you go through and you eat some tapas and you drink some wine, and you go to the next tapas and you eat and you drink and you stumble home and you're happy, and it's oh, I love it. The next picture, it gives us, you know, the crossroads. So you see the red line there is one of the roads, and the green are more roads, but that blue line is the Duero River that Toro is sitting on. and you see that it's a crossroads for good reason. I mean, this is a region that is less known. It was, although, wine has been made here for a long, long time, it was an off the beaten track region because Rioja, which is one of the oldest regions, maybe the only place older than Rioja is in the very south, the Sherry region, because that was where 1500 BC the merchants along the Mediterranean were bringing vines from really from Asia and planting them here in Spain. So the Sherry region is a very old region, and but Rioja became well known, and has been for hundreds of years. Rioja. Next, we can look at that old vine of Tinto del Toro. So that's an old Tempranillo bush vine. And what you're looking at is before it gets pruned for the season. So this is in the winter when before it gets pruned for the spring, where all new shoots will grow and new shoots will become these arms that will produce leaf and fruit. And so that's all going to get cleaned up in the winter so that it's ready for bud break in the spring. And that thick, gnarly vine, it looks like it could easily be a 50-year-old vine or older. And we have lots and lots of wonderful old vines. And the older the vine, the deeper the roots to just, in Spain, because it's very dry in much of Spain, they are allowed to irrigate. But these old vines don't need irrigation because those roots go deep and hit the water table below. When next we're back to my Google Maps. I just love Google Maps. And so there you can see Mallorca, Menorca, Ibiza. That's off of the east coast of Spain. And there you see Catalonia, which is where Barcelona is, the capital of Catalonia. And it is, Catalonia is the economic center of Spain, and is also part of why they want to secede from the Union. They feel like they're getting taken advantage of because they produce all of the wealth. It's also the home of Cava, where the sparkling wine of Spain. And although Cava can be made outside of Catalonia, I think 95% of Cava comes from Catalonia. And then south of and that is actually the Cava, where most of the Cava comes from, is south of Barcelona. And then a little further south of that is where we find the Priorat. And we can come back to me a second. We'll go to Priorat slides in a second. But the Priorat is a region that is hundreds of years old. It was like many of the great regions of France and Italy and Germany. The vineyards of the Priorat were first planted by monks and that were making wine for the sacrament. And the name Priorat comes out of the priory, the monastery of Carthusian monks that established their monastery at the site where a shepherd boy once, he said that he saw angels climbing a ladder to heaven. And so the Priorata de, what is it? Oh, I got to cheat. See, I was trying to remember. The Priorata de Scala Dei, the ladder to heaven, is the monastery was established there where the shepherd boy had this vision. And that priory is what gives the region of Priorat its name. And so the vineyards are, date back to the 12th century, to the 1100s. But when we fast forward, in the mid to late 1800s, there was a scourge of a vine louse that was eating on the vines, and the vines were dying. And so that really decimated a lot of the wine industry throughout Europe. And then turn of the century, we had 2 world wars, and then we come out of World War II, and Spain was commanded by Generalissimo Franco, who was the dictator of Spain. And so he really restricted a lot of progress in Spain. So it really wasn't until Franco died that, free at last, Spain just began to flourish with the independence that they then achieved. And so I really believe that that's why a lot of the greatest restaurants and a lot of the modern cooking that has come to us has come out of Spain. And wonderful winemaking kind of came back to itself. So the Priorat that had really fallen to waste, there was a group of winemakers that recognized the potential quality that existed there. And so in the late 80s, a group of 5 winemakers came together, and they found a vineyard that they all together developed the vineyard, made wine from the grapes from that one single vineyard, and the 5 of them established their own labels. So the same wine had 5 different labels. Close to Laubec. Here, I wrote them down because I'm always forgetting. So it was René Barbier's Clos Mogador, Alvaro Palacios Clos Dofi, Daphne Glorian, the Clos Erasmus, Jose Luis Perez had Clos Martinet, and I wrote one on the back of one of these. Where the heck do I know? Close. I'm losing one. I thought I wrote it down. Oh yeah, close to Laubec, right? Close Martinet, close to Laubec. Then 3 years later, that gave the others time to establish their own independent vineyards, and they all carried on with their own brands. So, but it's an amazing thing how these men came together. Actually, Daphne's a woman. These winemakers came together to reestablish the Priorat. And in the beginning, they weren't really sure what would be the best grapes to plant. So I will admit to having kind of a chip on my shoulder against the wines of Priorat because they were planting traditional Spanish grapes, Tempranillo, Garnacha, Cariñena. There, in the Priorat they call it Samso. That's the Catalan name for Carignan. But they were also planting Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, and Pinot Noir. And when I heard Pinot Noir in a region that, Pinot Noir is a very delicate, temperamental grape, and it gets pretty hot in the Priorat. So I just could not imagine. I'm thinking, what are these guys doing? But then when I visited and saw what's going on and was able to taste the wines and realized that they too were figuring it out, and they were just giving themselves all of the options, so that now they figured out that really Garnacha and Samso Carignan are the key grapes that really thrive in this region. And then if they want, they can season the wines, which is what our Priorat wine is. It is a base of Garnacha and Carignan with Cabernet and Syrah, I believe. And I sent out the tech sheets. You'll keep me honest. So we can put a nose in here, and obviously, if you put your nose in that, and then you come back to the two Tempranillo-dominated wines and the American oak. When I go from the third wine to wine number 2, and then wine number 1, that American oak really comes out, and really that aroma that is so different is the assertiveness that American oak has in wine. So a little bit of new American oak goes a long way. Coming back to our wine here, our Camins del Priorat. Let me ponder this a little bit because really there's a lot happening here. It's a mix of fruits, a mix of herbs, and maybe what do we like? Wild flowers and sage. Like I would say herb de Provence, but we'll put that aside since we ain't in France. But there's a lot of fruit and herb, and no denying the alcohol. You swirl that in the glass, and you see how it holds the glass. Gee, what is the alcohol here? Ding, 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 ding. 14.5% on that. 14.5% on our Toro wine. So these are going to keep us lubricated. Yeah, 13.5, which is very typical of Rioja. The higher elevation, cooler climate gives us the ability to have longer time on the vine, but not have such high sugars. So maybe the Rioja is the most elegant and balanced of the three. But let me hold on a second. I'll be right with you. So because of the Cabernet and the Syrah might be adding a little bit of pepper. The Cabernet may be adding a little bit of some kind of green green kind of, well, really for me, Cabernet gives kind of a green bell pepper. I don't know that I could really define that here. It's kind of mixed in with the herbs. Grenache and the Carignan too. Carignan by itself can have kind of a coarse, rustic tannin, but here mixed in with the other grapes, it really kind of helps to smooth it out. It is a wine that you can sink your teeth into. And I mean, the red fruits, we've got cranberries and strawberries and cherries and blackberries and maybe even a little bit of underripe or tart blueberry. So a lot of complexity going on. Alvaro Palacios is one of the original 5 winemakers that helped to establish the Priorat, and so has a long history here. You know, I talked earlier about Vega Sicilia. That was long the most sought after, most famous wine of Spain. Well, that was until Alvaro Palacios brought the gang down to the Priorat. And then he discovered this old Grenache, old vine Grenache vineyard that was on a hill that had a little chapel on it. And you know, interestingly enough, it's on a, what is it, a northeast facing hill. That's, you know, that's kind of counter, except that we know that it gets very warm. We get hot days and cold nights, and being facing north helps to avoid that direct hit sunlight. So we get a little less heat in that vineyard and allows the Garnacha grapes, and Garnacha can handle the heat, but it allows them to ripen a little bit slower. And so the wine that he made from that vineyard, he called L'Ermita. And when L'Ermita hit the shelves, it gained rave reviews. And you know, it's not a large vineyard, so this single vineyard wine created a high demand that pushed the price of it up. And L'Ermita today is a collector's item wine that Alvaro Palacios makes. So he stole a little bit of the sun from Vega Sicilia, but it's okay. Competition is good. They're not hurting at all. These are wineries that are well established and for good reason. So let me give a little taste. The tannin is there, but because the Cabernet and Syrah are much lower percentage than the Grenache, which is a thin-skinned grape, and the Carignan, I mean, we still have medium, maybe medium plus tannin. And again, tannin, let us remember, tannin is what you're feeling on your teeth right now from all 3 of these wines. Tannin is a natural preservative in wine. And so that's part of, along with the acidity, tannin, acid, and alcohol are all natural preservatives. That's why I expect to live a good long life, because all of the alcohol that I consume, you know, is going to preserve me too. So these wines, even this value wine, Gago, Dehesa Gago from Toro, has the requisite acid and tannin that this little wine is going to be good in your cellar for longer than, well, you're going to drink it before that. But if you forget about some bottles and, you know, 5 years from now, you'll come back to it and they'll still be drinking well. And because of the dominance of the Tempranillo, this is 100%. The Rioja is 95% Tempranillo. That high acidity makes these two the brightest, most cleansing of the three to your palate. This is a little lower in acid, but rich in complexity due to the blend of grapes that they've used here. Pretty good. Yeah, I think so too. So, we're coming around to that, dare I say, question and answer time. Anyone have something they want to say? You can tell me some of the things that you're tasting or some of the things that you like or maybe dislike. I can take it on the chin. I'm a big boy. Come on. Give me a little help here.
Greg Grande says that he loves the Cummins.
Greg Grande says he loves the Cummins del Priorat. And this is Palacios' baby. This is the entry level Priorat for Alvaro. Like I say, Lermita is, I can't afford Lermita. We may have Lermita. I know at Valentino we had some that was at a stupid price. When I visited the Priorat and I went into the store and I said, here I'm thinking I'm in the Priorat, I can get Lermita. Maybe I can get a bottle of Lermita cheap. And, it was like, I don't know. I think it was the equivalent of $350. And I said, my God, that's what I'm selling Lermita at Valentino for $350. The guy said, I'm flying to Valentino. I'm going to buy everything you got. So, these, there you go. You have my permission to like the Cummins. It's a delicious one. Somebody else?
Yes, sir. Neil Salmon asks,
Neil
says, best Spanish wine I've had is Cune, C-U-N-E. Can you tell me about
it? Is
Cune, C-U-N-E. Can you tell me?
Cune.
Cune, sorry.
Cune, yeah, well, that's Rioja. Again, a very traditional Rioja producer, and maybe you had the Gran Reserva. You're liking it because of the place where those grapes grow impact the wine tremendously. As I say, it's the elevation, it's the blend, it's the soils, it's old vines, and all of those things come together. I think that a winemaker that is in tune with his or her vineyard then becomes a part of the terroir, because you've heard me say this. I glibly say that wine makes itself. The yeast is on the grapes. And all you have to do is crush the grapes and the wine will make itself. Yeah, well, if you let the wine make itself, you'll have wine, but probably really bad wine. It's the winemaker that's making the decisions of how much fruit to allow the vine to grow, and most importantly, when to harvest those grapes. And choosing harvest time, you wait too long, the sugars are going to go up, the acids are going to come down, you're going to have a flabby, short-lived wine. If I always say the best winemakers are harvesting those grapes just before perfect ripeness, because if you wait for perfect ripeness, you've waited too long. And that's where we get, the best wines. So Cune, yeah, you have a good reason to have enjoyed that wine.
Michael Mateus is asking. What tapa would you eat with each wine?
Yeah. You know, we're in the home of the Happy Feet. You know, those pigs that eat the chestnuts, and or is it acorns? Chestnuts, acorns. Okay, there I go. I'm drinking wine. I'm forgetting stuff. Anyway, that they make such wonderful. Well, you know, 20 years in an Italian restaurant, I'm going to say they make the best, you know, aged ham like prosciutto. And so certainly that's going to go with all of these wines. And when we get into, you know, I don't, you know, maybe the Rioja would still work wonderfully with a paella, because you know, traditional paella is going to have meat, and it's going to have sausage, and it's going to have shellfish, and it's going to have seafood, and you know, I think that the Rioja would do well with it. When we get into these bigger wines, yeah, fatty meats, you know, pork chops, and even lamb is going to be great. Questions?
Yes, sir. Norman Racine says the Rioja wine is very good.
Norman Racine likes the Rioja wine. Is there a but?
There is. At par with Grand Reserve. Incredible value. Would you agree that this is a top value reservation? How do they do it?
Yeah. You know, how do they do it? That's the $1 million question. You know, number one, we're talking about properties that have been around for generations. You know, when you plant a vineyard, you're not planting it for yourself. What's the old joke? I'm great for old, you know, jokes. You know, what's the no, forget the joke. How do you make a small fortune in the wine business? It's by spending a large fortune. You know, when you plant a vineyard, you're not planting it for yourself. You're planting it for your children and your grandchildren, because by then the initial expense will have been made back. So when we have generation after generation of family making wine, you know, that investment has been paid off. And now you can afford to sell your wines at prices that people will appreciate and buy them. And so I think that's number one why these wines are such great values, is that they've got so much history. You know, Napa Valley, you know, God love Napa Valley, but you know, the investment, those guys will never make that money back. You know, period. You know, they've invested, you know, now it's big corporate dollars that have invested in a lot of the big wines in Napa. Those are wines that, you know, they don't care about the price, and because it's something that they use to market their products, or to have bragging rights that they've got, you know, they've got a wine. The families, and you know, thank goodness Napa Valley still has lots of families that are now generations in, and so you know, we see some of the value even from Napa Valley. But so that's, I think, you know, answer number one. We've got history here. Okay, Alvaro Palacios didn't start making wine in the Priorat until really the 90s, but the 90s is already 30 years, and they were careful, and he had other winemaking properties in Spain, so that could support the investment that he's making here. And so he's sharing, he's establishing a brand. And so, you know, Lermita is, you know, they make this much wine, and supply and demand has created the price of the Lermita. But, you know, he is able to give value to his wines. You know, when I visited Alvaro Palacios, he spared no expense on his winery. So he's got this destemmer, right? They take the grapes off of the stems, and it goes through this line and a conveyor belt, and then there's an infrared light that, as the grapes come off the conveyor belt, the infrared will sense if there is damaged fruit or under or overripe fruit. It sees it, and then an air blasts the grape out, and so only the perfect grapes fall into the trough to make wine from. So, you know, he's able to get this equipment that helps him, and he's going to amortize that, and he has other investments that allows him to make great wine and still be able to give us this wine at a value.
Michelle Bailey is asking, are all Riojas made of Tempranillo?
Michelle Bailey wants to know, is all Rioja made from Tempranillo? So Rioja is the place, and Tempranillo is the dominant grape. Now, when you see a Rioja Rosé, because Rioja makes red, white, and rosé wines, the Rosé Rioja is probably going to be Garnacha dominated, but it could have some Tempranillo or other grapes blended in, because the tradition of winemaking in Rioja is to blend these traditional grapes together. So, but for any red wine, red Rioja, Tempranillo is going to be the dominant grape. Yes. Alana Jaffe asks,
now that we've opened the wines, how long will they still be good if you don't drink them all?
Ah, good question. Now that the wines are open, how long are they going to last? Well, at my house, they're not going to last too long, because, but there's gas, there's the tools where you vacuum the air out. But if you've got half a bottle left or more or less, put the cork in and stick it in the refrigerator, right? That's what the refrigerator does. It preserves our food, and it preserves the wines too. So these wines will be good. Well, today's Monday. They'll be good through the week. And, when you want to drink it, you take it out of the refrigerator. An hour later, it'll be at room temperature or at a drinking temperature. Let's talk briefly about storage temperature. Your wines, you should have a little wine cabinet. Go out, buy your wine cabinets. I got one for $150, a little under the counter thing from Home Depot. I think I got mine. And it holds 3 cases of wine, maybe a little more I can cram in there. And I set it at 52 degrees. And 52 degrees is 52 to 56 is storage temperature for red and white wines. We store them at that temperature. If you keep your wine fridge at 52, those white wines, you can pull them out of the fridge and drink them at that temperature. If you have a sparkling wine, or maybe, a Sauvignon Blanc or a crisp white wine that you want a little more chill, you stick it in ice, and in 5 minutes, it'll be cooler. You don't want it to get below 45. That's too cold. You want to drink your white wines, your sparkling wines at around 45 degrees. It doesn't have to get colder than that. Your barrel fermented Chardonnays are perfect at 50 degrees. So 52 is okay too for those wines. Your rosés are going to be 50 to 55 degrees. Your Beaujolais are going to be good at 55 degrees. So you see, cellar temperature is good drinking temperature. For your richer, more tannic red wines, and I would put these in that category, we want to let them warm up to 60 degrees, 60 to 65. We don't want them higher than that. you know. Priorat, because it's working with, you know, Grenache and Carignan, they're very similar in style, although I find them to be much fresher than another wine region from France that I certainly love, Châteauneuf-du-Pape. These Priorat wines are on par with some of the great Châteauneuf-du-Pape wines. So look at some of those prices, look at some of these prices and compare.
Mr. Earl asks, what is your favorite Priorat?
Who asks?
Chris Toro.
Chris Toro?
What is your favorite Priorat? Does the club carry a couple of options to enjoy?
You know, I'll have to look. Caitlin, what do we got? I don't know off the top of my head. I have visited now a couple of times Mas Martinet, which again is one of the original 5 wineries. Actually, at this point, I think I've visited 3 or 4 out of the 5. I don't think, well, 3 out of the 5. I didn't do Close to Laubac or Close Erasmus. You know, I have a love affair. Now Sarah Perez has taken over the reins from her father at Mas Martinet, and she has a wonderful palate. And the wines at Mas Martinet are really great wines. You know, obviously, you know, Finca Dofi by Alvaro Palacios is great wine. I've got a couple of those in my little wine fridge that I bought while I was there, and you know, those wines are good for years, so I can forget that they're there. Yeah.
This one's coming from Wendy Lindsay.
Wendy Lindsay.
A big deal East Coast critic said Tempranillo Rioja is so varied.
Yes.
And she says, do you agree? I love every Rioja I've ever had.
Yes. You know, Rioja is varied because there are those properties like Lopez de Heredia and La Rioja Alta that are classic traditionalists. And when I say traditionalists, that means that they are using only the traditional grapes. They're aging for longer than required for all of their categories, Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva, and only using American oak. But many of the producers, like even Ontagnon, that's pretty classic, they've got some French oak that they're using. So, you know, they may be bringing stainless steel fermenters into there instead of, you know, the large cement or stainless steel and cement fermenters as opposed to big oak tanks. So yeah, there's a range of styles that we talk about, the traditionalists to the more modernists that are maybe making a little cleaner, a little riper, and using French oak instead of the American oak. But if you'll pardon my French, I say, vive la différence! You know, there's variety is good, and you know, if you like it, it's good. If you don't, it ain't.
Devani Wolfus says.
Devani Wolfus, yes.
These all be greatly paired with steak. Also, what kinds of cheese would you pair each wine with? Thank you. And they love, which I believe is the Antonio Rioja.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you know, fatty meats, because the meat, the fat coats the tannins and will soften the tannins, and then miraculously when and even affects the acid. The acid is working to cut through the fat, but the fat is also coating the acid and the tannin. And so fat will bring out a sweetness, because once we make it taste less tart, the perception is sweeter. So we'll get more sweeter fruits coming out of it. Dairy does the same thing. That's why cheese, and so what are some of the classic Spanish cheeses, that can go with it? I'm blanking right now because I'm drinking my wine. My wife is gonna take me out back and because she's I'm sure watching and said, what are you talking about? Sorry, honey. But I already said that I think this Rioja Reserva would go great with a paella. High acid wines have a better versatility. The Priorat still has acid, but doesn't have the acid of the first two. And so it's going to get more into, your more meat than not. How'd I do? I did great. That's why I love Chaz. Oh, you did great, Paul.
Norman Racine asks, how is the change in global temperature affecting the Spanish wine industry?
Norman Racine is asking about global warming. Warning! I'm talking on a touchy subject. Global warming. So you climate deniers, time to leave the room because you're going to want to take me out back, with my wife and flog me some more. Global warming is a reality. And I have said this to you before, when we talk about the Ice Age was not just a single period where, the planet froze and then thawed. It was a succession of freeze-thaw periods. And climatologists, is that? Yeah, I'll stick with that. Climatologists will tell you that we are still coming out of the last ice age. So the planet is warming naturally just because of that. However, and this is the contentious part, because man and woman, that's right, will share the wealth, have, exacerbated because of our technology and our, burning of fossil fuels and all of those things that, having so much, this is going to really rankle you, having so much beef, Americans have so much beef, and those cows, what do? Especially when we feed them corn that their bodies are not really ready to digest. And so, I don't know, when I eat things that my body doesn't want to digest, I do bad things. Ask my wife. She'll tell you. So, so so we are speeding up the global warming process by our fossil fuels and the bad things we're doing. So, yes, all of the regions are feeling the effects. And Spain, however, has, Garnacha, Carignan are great varieties that kind of thrive in the warmer. So they're doing okay. The elevation is helping the Tempranillo. Places like Bordeaux are starting to sweat. Right now, Bordeaux's having more grape vintages because of the warming. Germany, we're going to Germany next week. Oh, Wendy and I were in Germany 2 years ago. We had the time of our lives. I love Germany. Germany too is benefiting right now because Germany is outside of the 30 to 50 degree latitude. I don't want to give too much away because that's going to take my spiel for next week, but Germany is benefiting from the global warming. But, places, Australia, look what's happening in Australia with so many fires, that's global warming. So Australia is hurting. Tasmania, which is the island south of, on the south of Australia. I'm forgetting the city. So they're doing pretty good because it's an official cool climate. And so if it warms up for them, they'll have riper, and New Zealand is doing okay. South Africa, it's just surprising. We're going to South Africa in week 4, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So oh my God, look at you, what you have done to me. You've made me late for dinner. More questions?
Here's a ballpark question.
Okay, one more ballpark.
Greg Grande, what are your favorite 2 top reds if money was no object for each?
Oh my God, Greg Grande, if money was no object. When was money no object? Well, yeah. My problem is I love all my children equally. So I would be collecting, the great vineyards of the world, and that goes for the great vineyards of Germany, the great vineyards in Burgundy, obviously Bordeaux. Some of the collectibles of Napa are not my personal style, but some of them I had a bad attitude. I will confess that in just a short year plus that I'm here at the club, I've tasted some pretty great wines from Napa Valley. So my bad attitude is turning around. But I am still Euro-centered, and Washington State is a place that's commanding my attention. So I'm not going to really say any specific wine because there's too many, but there are regions that speak to me that I long to visit and explore. And just like I turned my bad attitude around when I visited the Priorat, I look forward to having people turn me around. I really want to visit South Africa. South Africa was cut off because of apartheid, and it was at the end of apartheid that the world started to trade with South Africa, and then their wine industry that had older beginnings then was able to reinvest. And so lots of great things are happening in South Africa. So, the world is our oyster to explore. And I hope you'll explore it all with me here. And, I am so appreciative of those of you that have been tasting with me, that have been coming in to see me at the restaurant up on the roof. I hope, you all will come up and let's chuck and jive. Let's taste some wines. Let's eat some food. Andreas, our chef Andreas is, I love this man, and he's doing great things. He's got such a wonderful demeanor and has such a wonderful palate and has so many tricks up his sleeve that he has yet to show us. So, we're looking pretty good here at the Jonathan Club. If I could just, get you in, and we're all dealing with that. I lament that with you, but don't give up the ship. We've got lots of plans for opening up as much as we can while we can't dine inside, and there's lots of great stuff ahead of us. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining me. This is such a gift that you have given me, and I'm not going to forget it, and I'm going to keep doing it as long as you abide. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.